Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my channel, Mormonism with Murph, where Larry Saint explores the church's history and truth claims. This is part four of the series I've been doing with Ganesh Cherian on his book, Joseph Smith, the Architect of Mormonism. And I've also got his friend David join us as well. So, guys, thanks for joining again.
Pleasure.
It's lovely to be with you, Murph.
Yeah,
Yeah,
this
absolutely.
is fun. I don't know when the series is going to end. Originally, I thought it was going to be like two or three parts, but we're on part four, and we don't know if we're going to get it all covered today, but we'll see. But we've covered aspects of Ganesh's book, talking about different 19th century influences or theology that he sees coming into the Book of Mormon from Joseph Smith's milieu. We did an episode talking about, I think, ancient elements in the Book of Mormon, discussing that, and then the last one we talked about Joseph Smith's level of intelligence, education, a bit about Book of Mormon complexity and like authorship, voices, stylometry, those sorts of things. And tonight, I think we're going to mainly focus on the witnesses, but we thought maybe we'd recap briefly how we finished the last episode. And you have a slide about, Brian Hales' argument. But before we get to Brian, I did a video responding to an interview that Steve Pinecker did with Kyle Beshears about
Mhm.
the Book of Mormon, and I was quite surprised that he didn't believe that Joseph Smith was the author of the Book of Mormon, but he doesn't believe it's ancient or divine. Because most people's theories, like yourself or Dan Vogel or William Davis or Grant Palmer, who take a naturalistic theory, generally go with that Joseph was the sole author and producer of it. And sometimes, as believers, we can, or apologists can point to seeing a lot of complexity in the text or the narrow time frame, and sometimes we can wonder, oh, well, is that just our own confirmation bias, and that's why we think it's so complex. But it's interesting to see an outsider who also doesn't think Joseph was able to produce it at age 23 with his level of education and intelligence in the narrow time frame, such a complex book with the theological sophistication. I guess, what was your thoughts on his opinion? Obviously, you would disagree with that, but what would you say to someone like Kyle, who seems like, a really intelligent person, a scholar who's coming from this, not as a believer, who also sort of concedes that I do see a lot of complexity to the Book of Mormon, doesn't compel me to believe it's ancient, but he doesn't believe Joseph's the author.
So I've met Kyle, and he is delightful. He is a brilliant man, incredibly astute, just and very articulate. Just and just lovely to be with. Just a treat to be with. He
Yeah.
really loves Mormonism. He is engaged. I met him at the John Whitmer Historical Association last year, and we spent some time together. And he has a copy of my book, so it made me think when I saw that he hadn't read my book, which I thought was really interesting.
Or
Um,
perhaps wasn't convinced by it.
the
But no, it
Yeah,
does seem
so
like
I
he's
haven't
doing a
had
more good faith engagement. I've not read his book yet. I want to
yes.
read it. It's going to take a while for it to arrive here in the UK, but it does seem to be a really good faith, approach to Mormonism. And I thought he was very thoughtful in his interview with Steve.
And he is such a bridge builder, right? Like and so I think that he's just that kind of person that um, we love to see in that Mormonism space of they're outside, but they're really respectful, but also incredible. He finds Mormonism and Joseph Smith and the beginnings in Western New York so fascinating, to the nerdly level that the three of us do, and it's just fabulous. So yeah, it's interesting that Richard Bushman on his Mormon Land um, podcast recently said that there's no enemies of the church anymore. There's a really good, faithful engagement from externally the church around issues of the church coming forth, and Richard Bushman ascribes that to the idea that the church has been a bit more transparent and being able to uh, be self-reflective over some of its more challenging aspects and not necessarily hide or be defensive or attack over points that obviously are really strong in the historic record. So yeah, Kyle is a really good example of that. John Turner is also a good example of that. Um, and so, yeah, this is a really exciting part of, I guess, Mormon history and Mormon engagement at a credible level of what happened, why did it happen, when did it happen, and what are the impacts, rather than us versus them or wrong versus right, that kind of engagement. So it's really, it's an amazing time to be engaged in this, and the three of us too are hopefully modeling that too, that thoughtful, lovely engagement, rather than we have to win this. It's more of a, well, these are some things to explore, so.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
he's adding another voice, another perspective on, all this dialogue about, Mormon origins and the Book of Mormon. And I think, yeah, his opinion and his view I thought was really interesting because I've not really heard it too much lately. There's the odd person who espouses the Solomon Spaulding sort of variant theory, but most naturalistic theories don't side with that. So I thought it was interesting. I'm curious, David, did you have a chance to see that clip with Kyle Beshear's about him not believing that Joseph Smith authored the Book of Mormon himself and sort of agree that he ceded a lot of narrative complexity to it, but he didn't believe that means it's ancient, but he believes there probably would have been another author. I think you and I would agree that it seems kind of hard to imagine Joseph getting a secret manuscript from someone and then, it's possible, but what do you think about that, David?
No, I didn't see it. I have read a little bit about that though, and yes, so I'm aware that there are people who um, follow that view, but I haven't seen that particular one. I did want to just quickly ask Ganesh a question here, and that is, with all of the dialogue that's going on inside the church and outside the church, and this wonderful interaction with non LDS historians, etc. Where does that leave the church in your view, Ganesh? Where is the mainstream church and the hierarchy in the church? What are they going to do, and how are they going to do it over the next decade or so?
That's a very good question, and I've wondered a lot about it. Somebody told me recently that just this past week, that the area presidency in Salt Lake or around that kind of Utah area had told the missionaries not to be reading saints and engaging with um, the the series of saints while they're missionaries, which I found really interesting. I don't know whether that then means they don't have access to things like the gospel topics essays, because if the current president of the church is Dallin H. Oakes, and he is, he's very legalistic. But in saying that, though, he has really spearheaded this idea of being a bit more transparent. So the person who did his biography, who is Rick Turley, who was the assistant church historian, those two are really close. And really, Rick Turley spearheaded the whole Saints project and made that possible. And and now Dallin H. Oakes, or previous to being the president, he's organised Rick Turley to write a comprehensive biography from the church's point of view on Joseph Smith, and so that's what's currently happening. Will be some years
Which will be
before we'll see
exciting because
that. But
there's been, John Turner's recent biography. You've always got Dan Vogel, so this is going to be another, Richard Bushman as well, Rough Stone Rolling, a really good biography. So this is going to be another exciting biography. I'm looking forward to reading that.
Yeah, so these are initiatives that President Oakes has been working on. So it's really interesting to think that even though President Oakes comes across as quite authoritarian and really, we've seen his address and he's worried about podcasters, so maybe he's worried about you, Beth. I don't know. But so there is a tension there, and it's a tension right at the very highest level. The idea that, on one hand, President Oaks is saying, look, don't, get your information from, thoughtful sources, faithful sources, when he's talking to an LDS audience, and it's in that kind of fireside setting. And then on the other hand, he's really promoting the idea of Joseph Smith biography. He's worked with Rick Turley extensively on the Saints volumes, so he's produced those works. So yeah, to your question, David, I don't know, but it's really exciting because it seems to be a real duality. And maybe it's the tension that is this current moment, which is that we have this rich history that should be presented, but the rich history doesn't always tell a faithful narrative that is inspiring and, it's easy to digest and for a faithful lens. And of course, that's causing some, disillusionment from, lots of, people. That's just the reality. So how is President Oaks, walking that line? Well, on one side he's telling the faithful don't listen almost, and on the broader Mormonism in the broader American space, saying, look, we need more credibility, or this is important to address. So it's I don't know, but it's fascinating.
Interesting to see. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So
So you have some slides prepared, Ganesh?
Watch this part.
Should we dive into your presentation?
Yes, let's get on to them so that we can talk about it.
I want to have my dinner tonight.
Yeah, that's it's early in the morning for me, so I can obviously, and we can talk about this all day. So here I just thought this is the kinds of things that we've already covered today. I was going to cover the witnesses, and if in time I've got archaeology, and maybe we can wrap it up with some apologetics and implications and some questions.
Yeah.
So just recapping. Really my book talks about Joseph as the architect of Mormonism, the idea that Mormonism is Joseph and Joseph is Mormonism, with the idea that the Book of Mormon is Joseph at 23 and Nauvoo, Illinois is Joseph at 38 before he died. This is why lots of our information about Joseph and the beginnings of the church are later innovations and evolutions that are backdated in the historical record, and seem like they should have always been the way that they were because it came forth from God. But when I go through the historic record, I tend to find that Joseph doesn't know what's going to happen, and he is adapting in the moment. And so when you go to the earliest recollections of people and the earliest documents, that you do see an evolution because Joseph is evolving, and that's the basis of the book. And so while the stuff that we're going to discuss today is not in the book, it's in the same vein. The idea that Joseph is changing in real time because of the circumstances which are happening. And I hope that I can kind of show that well. But I thought, just as a small recap, on our last podcast, we talked about Joseph Smith's ability, and Brian Hales is currently producing a book. It should be out soon. He told me it was going to be out early this year, but it's obviously being delayed. So we talked a little bit about Brian's perspective, and he made a comment that we addressed. And so he wrote in the comments this statement. I want to, Stephen, do you want to read it for us so that you can?
Sure.
Yeah, because I thought it was quite nice.
So Brian Hale writes, I appreciate Ganesh's comments and perspective. He is kind and is willing to listen to alternate perspectives. Around 14 minutes in, he mentions Isaac Hale and Jesse Smith as men who apparently believed that Joseph had the intellectual ability to create the Book of Mormon. Ganesh is probably right. However, the question is whether either man was familiar with the book's content, with 77 storylines, 207 characters, 147 locations, 100,000 words of religious discourse on 75 Christian topics, etc.? Probably not. If not, how could they make an accurate judgment? Regardless, Ganesh makes a good point, so let me clarify. I believe no one familiar with the content of the Book of Mormon and with Joseph Smith's 1829 literary skills accused him of being its inventor or being the intellectual source of its words, which is the foundation assumption of Ganesh's book. If I've missed any eyewitness accounts, I would appreciate anyone's assistance. So some kind,
Cool.
nice words to you. Like one, I would agree with him saying that you've been very kind, and I appreciate you coming on and wanting to deal with the different perspectives or some of the apologetic arguments. And he's conceding that, yeah, it seems that Isaac and Jesse, as you pointed out, likely believe because they witnessed that Joseph was the one who was dictating that he was the author. I guess any comments you want to say to his response?
Well, I think it's just lovely. Brian, I really like him. He has not always been kind to people that disagree with him, so I feel very fortunate. And like I highlighted that. Ganesh is probably right. Ganesh makes a good point because I think it's.
Oh yeah, I've noticed those are the things that you highlighted.
Yeah, but it's a good faith engagement too. The idea that and going back to that point earlier, we're not the us versus them, that we have to be right. It's okay, let's think about this thoughtfully. What is it? What's the information? And the idea that he'd thrown out the idea that nobody in Joseph Smith's time thought that he'd produced the Book of Mormon, and I said, oh well, we've got this information from Isaac Hale, and we've got this information from Jesse Smith, and he said, well, yeah, that seems like they believed that it was Joseph. And so then he's clarified and said, well, they might not have read the Book of Mormon, and that's possible.
Yeah. So he's basically saying that they wouldn't be familiar with the content, and he's pointing to narrative complexity of it. So he's saying that there's no one who that he's aware of from any sources who are familiar with the book's content and level of complexity who are claiming he's the author. But at least he's sort of acknowledging the points you made and clarifying or refining his position or prior argument.
Yes, great. And so, and he does start in with, I would appreciate anybody's assistance if I'd missed any eyewitness accounts. And so I'd like to just point out a couple, maybe. Let's have it. So, one of the really interesting thoughts is, who believes it could be Joseph, and who knows Joseph and knows his abilities in 1829, and who is familiar with the content of the Book of Mormon. And I would say that there's two people, maybe the same person, who thinks this, and that is God and Joseph. So one of the things that's really interesting is that when the Book of Mormon was published, or even just before, when it was going to the publisher, we have two really big points of text. One is Doctrine and Covenants section 10, which talks about the replacement text and its need for the replacement text. And this is God telling Joseph that people are going to use the lost manuscript to discredit Joseph and to discredit the work and to destroy it, basically. And then at the same time, Joseph writes a preface for the 1830 version of the Book of Mormon, and that basically says the same kinds of things, reiterates them. And this is because I would suggest Joseph doesn't know where the lost manuscript is. He doesn't know whether it's been stolen, whether it's been taken and burnt. He doesn't know whether, he doesn't know. He has no idea. And he doesn't know if they're going to turn up and they're going to be different. Remember, this is an oratory production. So therefore, he can't produce the text again exactly the same. He might be able to produce a lot of the same kinds of words. And if we go back to a few podcasts ago, I they gave the example of Mosiah 9 and 10, that they're the same story outline because they have the same memorized points, but they read quite differently because, Joseph, it's an oral production. And so Joseph kind of knows what's in the previous information that he did a year and a half ago, but he can't produce it word for word, and he doesn't know if it's going to be used. So he believes, and I would suggest that Doctrine and Covenants section 10 is his alter ego, God, on his behalf, saying that, well, let's just read it. Doctrine, I just took an excerpt, but you can read the whole of Doctrine and Covenants section 10. This is 31. Behold, they shall not accomplish their evil designs in lying against those words. For behold, if you should bring forth the same words, they will say that you have lied and that you have pretended to translate, but that you have contradicted yourself. And the section goes on to talk about how, you shouldn't, somebody lying and deceiving because they think you're lying and deceiving is not okay. And then Joseph writes the preface, and he takes many of the same things from Doctrine and Covenants section 10, and he says, if I should translate the same over again, they would publish that which they had stolen, and Satan would stir up the hearts of this generation that they might not receive this work. So and this is prefaced at the end with the author. That's how he's titling himself in the preface and in the beginning of the 1830 Book of Mormon. So I would suggest that in these two examples, Doctrine and Covenants section 10 and also the 1830 preface, that there is an understanding that people believe it's Joseph. They believe that the inference is that they will think that Joseph has done it and that he's pretended. So the person who's writing Doctrine and Covenants section 10 and the person who's writing the 1830 preface, their understanding of Joseph is that people are going to believe it's Joseph. And they, neither God in section 10 or Joseph in the preface, make the case that Joseph is not educated enough for this to be the case. Does that make sense as an argument?
I'm struggling to understand that argument just a little bit, Ganesh. I don't know whether you can unpack it a bit further. I don't see here where it's saying that Joseph was the author, and that's really, or I'm not really seeing where they believe that Joseph was the author, but that is what you're suggesting. Have I understood that correctly?
Yes. So God in Doctrine and Covenants section 10 is making the case that people believe it's Joseph and that they are going to bring forth the lost manuscript to discredit him and show the contradiction in the text, and that he's pretending to translate, but it's really Joseph. Does that make sense? So that the inference of Doctrine and Covenants section 10 and the inference of the preface of the 1830 Book of Mormon is that people believe it's Joseph doing this, not that it's done by God. And so the inference is that whoever's writing Doctrine and Covenants section 10 and whoever's writing the preface, which is Joseph, believe that other people believe that it's him. Does that make sense? Because if that wasn't the case, the thing would read a different way, right? It would read like this. It would, Doctrine and Covenants 10 would be like, God would say, you've lost the manuscript. Look, I want you to do a different version. So we're going to do, a replacement text. People might be against you, but there's no way. You're a lowly farm boy who knows nothing. I've made you do the Book of Mormon because you know nothing, and people will see that you have no skills whatsoever, and they will know that this is the power of God, right? That's what it should say. That's what Doctrine and Covenants should say, Doctrine and Covenants section 10. But it doesn't. It says, look, wicked men are going to use the lost manuscript to discredit you by bringing it forth and showing a contradiction and saying that you lied and that you pretended to translate, because you can't really translate, because you can't bring the same words over again. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, not to me, but
Well, maybe I could interject with a comment of what I'm trying to understand what your argument is. So on the one hand, because I've heard many critics use this passage to say that, it's almost convenient that the Lord is saying to Joseph basically to not retranslate the lost portion, basically, and saying that, wicked men, they have the manuscript and they're going to change it or possibly rewrite it. And this shows that Joseph is the author, because if he really was a translator and had the gift of translation, he could have reproduced the same words. Now, I could see from a believing perspective how they would interpret this is like if you believe that Joseph could have reproduced it again word for word, or if he was actually reading it from the stone. Say if a believer actually believed that, they might see it as God is telling Joseph that even if you reproduce it again, these people that have the manuscript, they might rewrite it. So they will make it look like it's contradicting because they want to stop the Lord's work, if that makes sense. So even if hypothetically Joseph did retranslate it and it matched word for word, they would interpret it as it's these people that have the manuscript who want to corrupt it to basically undermine the Lord's work. But is your point that you're saying that you think that those people think he's the author because they want to change his word? I think that's the little disconnect I'm having, fully understanding.
So I know it's quite complex here, because it's really saying what is the underlying assumption of the revelation. Doctrine and Covenants section 10. What's the underlying assumption of the preface? What I'm saying is the underlying assumption of Doctrine and Covenants section 10 and the preface of the 1830 Book of Mormon is that Joseph is lying, that he's pretending to translate when it's just really him doing his own thing. That's the underlying premise of the problem that the Doctrine and Covenants section 10 and the preface are trying to solve, because they're trying to solve the idea that the lost manuscript is not going to look like the current manuscript, or the manuscript that he brings forth. And because the people who are doing it are lying, they're saying, you've tried to pretend and we've altered the manuscript. Now, aside from the fact that you can't just alter a manuscript, you'd be able to tell that, right? So actually bringing forth the same words would confirm Joseph's translation ability. And so this whole point is mute, or in fact, it works against Joseph. However, the underlying assumption, which I'm trying to suggest, is on the basis of Brian Hales' question, is that is there anybody who believes, who knows Joseph's 1829 ability and the contents of the Book of Mormon, that believe that he could do it? Well, I'm suggesting that these passages suggest that Joseph knew his 1829 ability and knew that he could do it, and he knew the content, obviously, because he just finished dictating it. And it's written in the kinds of questions that these passages are trying to address. The idea that he's pretending to translate when actually he's the source, he's the author, he's the means by which this comes forward.
Okay, so my understanding is you're interpreting this as this is sort of Joseph's solve for why he can't reproduce the same words, and he's basically saying that, if you were to reproduce the same words, they're going to alter the manuscript to show that they contradict, but this is really because if he's the author, he couldn't reproduce the same words, and you would see that as pointing to him being the author. And I guess
he knows he can't produce the same words, so therefore he has to make an excuse for why he's got to produce a replacement text which is going to be different.
Okay,
Sorry,
I
but
understand
why?
that view or
Okay,
interpretation.
why does he know that he can't produce the same words?
Because he knows it's an oral dictation. So he knows that when he may be able to pick out the points, but he won't be able to give word for word. It's going to be different. The words are going to be different. Just like Mosiah 8 and 9 are different, even though they're the same skeletal outline. Just like how the the accounts of Aaron and Ammon in Book of Alma are the same story outline, but they're different. Or Noah and Replikesh, or Korihor and Sherem, they're the same story outline because they're made from the same skeletal core, but because he's producing it orally, the words that he uses in the moment, it's going to be different. It's just the reality of the way that the Book of Mormon is composed.
Thank you for unpacking that. I didn't see it at first, but I think I get where you're coming from now. Thank you.
And just one
Yeah.
last point on
So,
this. What would you say to a believer who might view it as if they view that the Book of Mormon translation was Joseph was actually reading the words, that he saw them typed word for word on the stone, similar to how many of the witnesses describe the translation, maybe being filtered through sort of Joseph's language and vocabulary. And what if they interpret it as maybe the people that had the manuscript, not so much that they would have altered the current manuscript, but maybe they could have rewritten it in a way to make it look contradictory if he reproduced the same words? And what if they interpret that the Lord is saying that's what they might have done, is almost like rewrite the manuscript? So even if you produce the same words, they would still present their new manuscript as being contradicting to, the retranslated text.
well, I would say if the seer stone is that powerful, how come it can't tell Joseph where the manuscript is and who has done this dastardly deed?
Mm.
Because if that's what Joseph is saying seer stone can do, right? Like in Doctrine and Covenants section 7, it can remote view John's parchment in a cave on the other side of the world. This is how powerful the seer stone is. It could, and he's saying, look, it could, retranslate the same words in Doctrine and Covenants 10. But it's not. But that wouldn't be any point, because the people who are against the work are going to alter the manuscript. Okay, who are those people? Where is the manuscript? Why don't you just go get it from them? Because you've got this powerful seer stone that can traverse time and space and knows all things. How come it can't know who the people are, what's happened to the manuscript? Because the 1830 preface is dropped from the Book of Mormon because the lost manuscript never turns up. So the 1830 preface doesn't need to go on the front of the Book of Mormon to explain the lost manuscript, because the lost manuscript doesn't ever appear. So that's why you can't read it in the current version, because you have to go back to the 1830 version to see it, because this is a problem. This is one of those issues where the stone only knows what Joseph knows. He says that the stone can transverse space and time, but when you test it with things like the lost manuscript, it only can tell him things that he is in control of, and it doesn't tell him things that will happen that are out of his control, or help him find something that's out of his control. So that suggests that the stone is really just a way to say what he wants to say, so it looks like it's external to him.
And one last point in this, because I know we've got so many slides to go through, so I don't want to belabor the point. But what if a believer were to point out to, like section 3 of the Doctrine and Covenants, when Joseph is pretty much rebuked for the loss of the 116 pages and sort of giving in to the persuasions of men, and he's told that he's lost his gifts and his privileges for a season. And I think section 10 also talks about like his mind being darkened. So they might see it as, this is almost like the consequence that Joseph had for losing the manuscript, that he lost his gifts for a time, and basically the Lord might have been like, well, this is the consequence, you're not going to get it back after what you did.
Well, I think that actually kind of happened in the sense that he's so distraught about what, the loss of the manuscript, is that he felt really darkened. He did feel like a loss, that he felt like he couldn't do this again, or that all was lost and he was in despair. I think that's a massive pivot in his particular story. So yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the thing about the Doctrine and Covenants too. Like I just said about the seer stone. The seer stone doesn't know anything that Joseph doesn't know. That's also the case of the Doctrine and Covenants revelations. They don't know anything more than Joseph knows. And in fact, they turn out to be wrong in lots of cases. And Doctrine and Covenants section 10 is a good example, and Doctrine and Covenants section 3, for two reasons. One is it identifies as Martin Harris as a wicked man, as somebody who is fighting against the work. Now, this is not the case. Martin is on board, but Joseph is so distraught about the loss that he blames Martin and says that Martin is in cahoots with the or he's either the person or he's in cahoots with people who are fighting against the work. And that's simply just not the case. In fact, he goes on to be a witness. I mean, that's what we're going to talk about next. So all of these direct things to Martin Harris being a wicked man in Doctrine and Covenants section 3 and Doctrine and Covenants section 10, at that particular moment, Joseph feels like Martin is wicked. He's the enemy. But Joseph doesn't know that Martin is going to become a witness. And God doesn't know either, because he doesn't say in Doctrine and Covenants section 10 or Doctrine and Covenants section 3 for a moment that this wicked man is going to repent and he's going to be one of the witnesses. It doesn't say that in Doctrine and Covenants section 3 or Doctrine and Covenants section 10. But that's what happens. Martin becomes a witness. So is Martin a witness and a righteous man who's testifying to the truth, or is he a wicked man? Because Doctrine and Covenants section 3 and Doctrine and Covenants section 10 say Martin is a wicked man. You can't trust him. You put your faith in somebody who is being directed by the devil. Okay. So that's a problem, right? So things change. Martin, wants to be involved in work. He gets picked as one of the witnesses. But he's, according to Doctrine and Covenants section 3 and 10, he is of the devil. So
I'm actually trying to look at the language. Yeah, I think section 3 and section 10 does say, it does refer to him as a wicked man.
Yeah, it doesn't say, oh gosh, it doesn't tell the future. It doesn't say, you're going to reconcile with Martin. Martin's going to prove himself worthy, and he's then going to be a witness of these plates. So, it's all going to turn out great in the end. When Doctrine and Covenants section 3 is written in 1828, Doctrine and Covenants 10 is written in 1829, Joseph believes Martin is, some kind of bad person because he can't recover the manuscript.
Yeah, I do think the word wicked's a bit harsh, but what if, because my memory is that didn't Martin make a covenant with Joseph that he would only show it to, wasn't it like 5 people? And I think I'm reading here in section 3 where it talks about like him breaking the most sacred promises which were made before God. So I wonder if that's in reference to him showing it to more than those 5 people, and that's sort of like the context for what he means by wicked, as opposed to like Martin being like one of the conspirators wanting to destroy the work. It was more reference to like Martin didn't keep to the vow or the oath that he made.
Yes, that's true. But in Doctrine and Covenants section 10, he says, the revelation says that Martin is a deceiver, and basically because you can't tell, because you, Joseph, can't tell who's of the devil or not. This is why you're in this terrible situation. But Joseph has this seer stone. He has this powerful seer stone that transverses space and time. How come he can't use the seer stone to tell that Martin didn't, take the manuscript, that Martin isn't the wicked man, that whoever is the wicked people who have taken it, and what have they done with it? Are they using it to discredit him? Have they destroyed it? Have they have they sent it to across the other side? He doesn't know. He has no idea. But neither does God. No. In these sections, God only knows what Joseph knows, which is he doesn't know. So, in fact, he gets it wrong. Martin's not the wicked man, So Martin's going to be really important to the coming forth of the Book of Mormon. He's going to provide the funds for the publication. He's going to be a witness. He's going to, basically be the man by which the whole of this whole project is going to come to pass. So, it's really tricky. Like, if you really look at this, the idea of what does Joseph know, what does God know, that seems to align really closely. Does God know anything through these revelations that Joseph doesn't know? Doesn't seem to be. Does God have the same biases and concerns and worries of Joseph? Yes. Does God have, is God judging people in a particular way that Joseph is also judging them? Yes. Joseph and God are aligned, but God doesn't seem to know anything more than Joseph knows, according to the revelations.
I'm going to have to read section 10 again tonight. I'm interested to read through it again.
Okay, well, let's go on anyway, because we've got plenty to cover, and I'm sure this will be a big talking point in the discussion and comments. Okay, so this is what we're really going to talk about, although I think that this was a good framing that we're just talking about. So the witnesses, this was one of the questions that was originally on the first podcast that we wanted to flesh out, and so we'll talk about it. So the witnesses, how do you explain the witnesses of the gold plates? This is the question. Not only did Joseph have the creative ability, oral gifts of all the doctrinal ideas, incredible memory, but then prophesied in the Book of Mormon, 3 witnesses would see the angel and plates and create a set of plates to dupe the 8 witnesses. So this is the question. So this is the kind of tack that I'm going to take in talking about the witnesses, and we're going to go through just to give you a little outline plan. So my thoughts are the witnesses are problematic, just in a general sense. Now, I'm not. You did a lovely episode with Colby Reddish on this recently, so I'm not going to kind of talk about witnesses as an issue, but I would refer people to that episode, because Colby is fabulous. You and him just had a lovely discussion. I thought it was just
I thought it was a really thoughtful dialogue and discussion, and we're having a couple more as well. So I've got one that I need to release soon. But yeah, Colby's great.
Great. So people can go and my thoughts align directly with Colby's on that, so we don't need to rehash that. But I wanted to flesh out some of the things that he was talking about, but also interject some more information from the historic record that I think is really interesting. One is that all the participants that we're going to talk about today are financially invested. They needed the Book of Mormon to be a financial success. And we'll talk about that. There are some inconsistencies in Doctrine and Covenants section 5, which is talking about the idea that these 3 people will testify, and then there's the Book of Mormon has some issues regarding witnesses, and then the idea that the 8 witnesses weren't a part of the plan. That is a tack on later, and I'll try and show that through the historic record. We'll talk about the witnesses being from folk magic origins, and how important this is to their understanding of what's going on. And you talked a little bit about this with Colby Reddish, and I'm just going to add some more information on that. And then along those same lines, I'm going to talk a little bit about Hiram Page, his revelations that were in Doctrine and Covenants, that Doctrine and Covenants section 28 seeks to address, and Oliver Cowdery's revelations, because, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, but the beginning of the church wasn't Joseph in charge and everybody else following him. This was a very egalitarian church at the beginning. And so other people getting revelations wasn't an issue. That was a big part of why they all kind of came together on this. And this was quickly stamped out and Joseph became the lead. But other people had revelations and they were totally consistent with what they believed the beginnings of the church were. And then I want to talk about Doctrine and Covenants section 17 and its coercive aspects, because this is the revelation that Joseph has for David and Oliver and Martin. And understand that lots of the kinds of, when we're talking about the ways that God is speaking through Joseph with revelations, there are lots of coercion in the book of in the Doctrine and Covenants, that there's carrots and sticks. If you do this, you will be blessed. If you don't do this, you will be cursed. And we're going to talk about why that might be an issue. So here's a couple of artifacts, and I just want to just as we're going to come back and refer to these in a minute, but I just wanted to show you a few. What first is that in that top left-hand corner, this is the agreement with Isaac Hale for Joseph to take a mortgage on the cottage next to his house. So Joseph, and also Joseph Knight Sr. tell the understanding that Isaac Hale was going to throw Joseph out of his cottage, evict him, because really the Hales were just exacerbated by Joseph's behavior and whole, treasure digging elements of this project that he was doing with regard to the Book of Mormon. They were going to throw him out. Oliver comes on the 5th of April, 1829, from Palmyra, and they discuss things. Obviously, it's really dire at this particular moment. And so that the next day, Joseph makes an agreement with Isaac Hale. You can see his signature there. You can see Oliver Cowdery's signature there because he's right there. And Oliver, they make a mortgage so that Joseph can be financially independent of the Hales. And there's a $64 down payment on the property towards a $200 complete price. Now, the Joseph Smith Papers Project says that Oliver Cowdery just been paid $65.50. Joseph Smith has no money whatsoever. So Oliver Cowdery provides the down payment of Joseph's mortgage. Basically, all that he has, his kind of life savings up until this point, he gives to Joseph to secure this mortgage on the Harmony cottage. So Oliver is financially invested in this project. The bottom left-hand corner is an agreement that was written by Joseph Smith, or maybe even Joseph Smith Sr. It's hard to tell from the last two letters. But this is January 1830, and this is where Martin Harris is getting really worried about the sale of the Book of Mormon, because the people of Palmyra say that they're going to boycott the publication and not buy the books. And Martin is frantic. He wants some kind of assurance that he's going to get his money back because he's mortgaged his farm for this. And so there's an agreement there from Joseph Smith, Senior or Junior, we're not quite sure, that basically says you're going to get your money first. The first selling of the Book of Mormon books are going to be for you, so that you can basically pay back the mortgage that you've taken off on your farm. and you can be secure. Now, because of that promise to Martin, Joseph Smith gets a revelation. He's back in Palmyra. This particular point, he gets a revelation in February of 1830 that sends, and that's a document on the right-hand side, Oliver Cowdery, Joseph Knight, Hiram Page, and Josiah Stoll to Canada to sell the international copyright for the Book of Mormon, because they need money. They need funds, and they need funds immediately. And if Martin is getting his funds from, to pay back his mortgage first, there's going to be no funds from the publication of the Book of Mormon. And so Joseph gets a revelation from God to go to Canada to sell the international copyright for $8,000, and sends these 4 men to go do that. And this completely fails, of course. In fact, when he gets back, David Whitmer tells a story much later that they're like, well, why did this revelation from the stone fail? And so Joseph looks into the stone, and the stone tells him that some revelations are from God, some revelations from man, and some revelations from the devil. And so this revelation, which is in the Revelation book, never gets put into the 1833 Book of Commandments, because it never comes to pass. But I would also suggest, and I'm going to try and show, that so these people were making a huge investment in the Book of Mormon publication, and they wanted a return. These people, when we're talking about Oliver Cowdery, Joseph Knight, Hiram Page, and Josiah Stoll, they are financial investors. That's why they're being sent on this mission, to get money, because the reality is the Book of Mormon is supposed to pay them back for everything that they have already given to the project, but also provide for them going forward. And in January and February of 1830, before the Book of Mormon is published, this looked very dire. So Joseph is getting revelation in his stone to do these certain things. Of course, the stone, for some reason, doesn't know that the copyright in Canada is not particularly useful, and that it's not going to work. So the revelation fails. And anyway, we'll come back to these. I just wanted to point them out, because these are actual things documents we have around the finances of the Book of Mormon.
I actually wasn't aware of the £64 that Oliver Cowdery gave Joseph. I wasn't aware of that document. I knew obviously about Martin Harris and the money he gave Joseph and him mortgaging his farm. Yes. Like, is there? Oh, I guess you got maybe a slide talking about this, but how Joseph Senior and Josiah Stoll are mentioned in going to Canada. Do we have any evidence or sources of them investing financially in the Book of Mormon?
We're going to get to that in just a minute.
Okay.
So yes is the answer to that question. But first, let's just talk about the 3 witnesses first. This is a quick recap. Maybe David, can you read these? Because I'm saying that these are evidences of their involvement, financial involvement in the project.
Sure. Oliver Cowdery, 6th of April 1829 agreement, Joseph Smith papers, notes. Cowdery likely also contributed some or all of the $64 handed to Hale that day as the initial payment towards the purchase price of $200. Not a bad price, incidentally, for a 13-acre plot. Cowdery had recently collected a teacher's salary of $65.50. David Whitmer, Doctrine and Covenants 1411, June 1829, quote, "And behold, thou art David, and thou art called to assist, which thing if you do and are faithful, you shall be blessed both spiritually and temporally, and great shall be your reward. Amen," close quote. Martin Harris, Doctrine and Covenants, section 19, 20, 26, summer 1829, quote, "Wherefore I command you again to repent, lest you suffer these punishments of which I have spoken. And again, I command thee that thou shalt not covet thine own property, but impart it freely to the printing of the Book of Mormon, which contains the truth and the word of God. Close quote.
So we know that Oliver Cowdery, gave this money. We know that Martin Harris gave the money, of course, because he put a mortgage. David Whitmer's investment is a lot more subtle, I guess, in the sense that the Whitmers were really poor, but they gave of their house, particularly in June of 1829, and it was a massive. These people are really poor farmers, and they provided for Joseph and Oliver during the replacement text, all of the rest of the translation, and part of the Doctrine and Covenants section 14 is that David's going to be a preacher. This is a great work, that he's going to be blessed, and rewarded temporally as part of this. So I would suggest all of the three witnesses are financially invested. They need a return on their service. The Whitmers have given up their home, their resources to provide for this. They're expecting a kind of return from this. But we absolutely know that Martin Harris is going to, he's mortgaged his farm and he wants the money back. We know from that January 1830 agreement that he's got Joseph Smith Sr. or Jr. to sign, that he needs his money back. He's expecting it. Oliver Cowdery, we're not sure if he wants his money, if he's expecting his money back, but it does seem likely. He's pretty much given up his whole teacher's salary from the previous year, for this endeavor. He's expecting that back with interest, with, benefit.
Do you not think the verse, if you go back to David Whitmer, do you not think someone might think that it's a little bit vague to say that David Whitmer was sort of financially invested, or he expected financial, shall we say, benefits or profits from it, when it talks about like being blessed spiritually and temporally? Like we see that language in scripture. I think isn't it King Benjamin that talks about like those who keep the commandments will be blessed spiritually and temporally, and great shall be your reward. And like, what if someone were to say that it seems very vague, and like, is it too much of a leap to say this means that he was anticipating and expecting financial benefits and a financial profit from the Book of Mormon?
Yes, is the answer to that question. You're absolutely right. It is vague, and it is kind of a little, and it could be viewed in that way. Absolutely, I'm saying that when you understand that the other witnesses had a significant investment in the Book of Mormon, then when you read things like this in Doctrine and Covenants section 14, it could lend you on the other side of the coin. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. My other question, and maybe I'm jumping ahead, maybe we'll address this later, but is your point about this that, we have Martin Harris mortgaging his farm and hoping to, get money back for that? With Oliver, we don't know, but he's giving money to this project. A believer might see it as they're doing this because they sincerely believe this is the Lord's work, and they're financially sacrificing for it, donating to the work coming forward. But do you see this as pointing towards like they're almost financially invested, therefore they're almost like in on it, like this causes them to lose credibility that they might be part of a conspiracy? Or do you still see it as, no, they're sincere, genuine believers, but I guess what's sort of the main point of the financial investment? Because some people I've heard online point to as like, oh, that points to them being part of the conspiracy because they were financially invested. I guess what sort of the main takeaway from, even if they were financially invested, does that take away anything from their sincerity or that they really believed?
I think it points to the idea that they're highly motivated. They're highly motivated to see the success of this project because it involves their money, right? It doesn't mean that they don't believe, or that they're a conspirator, right? It just means that they're highly motivated, and they're highly motivated to see it in a particular way. for instance, when I talked just before about the failure of the Canadian trip, that, you know, and David Whitmer attests that, they will, well, why did this fail? Look in the seer stone and ask the question. Well, Joseph does, and basically finds out that, these people didn't go, oh gosh, that seer stone is not reliable. Sometimes, and the seer stone says that sometimes the revelations come and they're from the devil, and some from man, and some from God. Well, that would seem like the seer stone is totally unreliable, and why should I even base my whole life and investment on this? But they don't. They double down, and I think this is a very human thing to do. Once you are financially invested, once you've given up resources that you think are going to come back to you, because that's quite a loss, then you are much more motivated for it to happen. It's called the sunk fallacy cost, right? The fact that
Right.
you can't, Oliver Cowdery has effectively, one of the things we know about Oliver Cowdery and Joseph Smith is after he's given this money to the production of the Book of Mormon in April of 1829, Joseph and Oliver have no money left. Like Oliver has given all of his money because they are stretching around for resources, and Joseph Knight Sr. has to help them because Oliver has given all of his money. Now that means he's all in. He needs to see it through, and maybe if things come up that are not, that don't settle well with him, well, he's going to have to just put that aside because he just has to focus on the end game, because the end game is that he's given everything, so he needs to see it through. And I think that's I think we ignore the fact that this is a major part of the Book of Mormon, right? Because, like you said rightly, Murph, that you can say out of the goodness of their heart they are doing this. They're contributing to this because it's something they feel incredibly passionate about, and I totally agree that that's true. And they are financially invested. This is really important to them. They are expecting a return. These people are incredibly poor. If they make a trip anywhere, it costs them money. And so they're not going to make a trip unless they're not doing it for fun. They are doing it because they think it's going to be financially viable. David Whitmer, when you listen to his accounts and about going to pick up Joseph and Oliver from Harmony, Pennsylvania. Now he has to sow his fields. His dad's worried about sowing the fields because if you don't work through the summer and sow your fields, you won't eat during the winter. This is not like, we just will be a little short this year and, we'll figure it out. No, you will not eat. This is life and death almost. It's not quite life and death, but it's pretty close. So giving up days to travel to Harmony, Pennsylvania to get rescue Oliver and Joseph, giving up resources in your homes where two people are producing a text and they're eating, but somebody else is providing that food. This is a major sacrifice from the Whitmer family. This is not just, come and stay with us for a couple of weeks and, all good. You just hang out, do whatever you need to do. You've seen the Whitmer cabin. It is a log cabin. They do not have much at all, like this is not, they're giving everything they have to the project. I mean, it's not money because they just don't have money. Joseph's not giving any money either because he has nothing. Joseph has not a cent. So he's relying on Martin Harris, who's got money. He's relying on Oliver Cowdery, who's got money. He's relying on the Whitmers, who are willing to have them in their home. But he knows that it's a sacrifice, and this is and he's giving them revelations that are saying spiritually and temporally, because that's what they need. To us, spiritually temporary. Hearsay. These are really big words to the Whitmers and to David Whitmer.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
And here is another investor, and that is Joseph Knight Sr. And maybe David, I'll get you to read these two, these as well. Just the top two, and the third one, actually, at the bottom is Joseph saying the same thing about Joseph Knight Senior. So maybe, yeah, just.
So this top one, Ganesh, it reads a little funnily. Can you just explain what am I reading here?
So this is Joseph Knight's. This is Joseph Knight Senior's reminiscence about the production of the Book of Mormon. And Joseph Knight Senior lives nearby in New York, around that Colesville, Bainbridge, South Bainbridge area. So about 30 miles from, well, that's what from where Joseph and Oliver are.
Okay, got
it.
Yeah, totally got it. Joseph Knight Senior, he being poor and no means to live, but work, his wife's father and family were all against him and would not help him. He and his wife came up to see me the first of the winter 1828 and told me his case, but I was not in easy circumstances, but I let him have some little provisions and some few things out of the store, a pair of shoes, $3 in money to help him a little. Now Joseph and Oliver came up to see me if I could help him to some provisions, having no way to buy any. I went again and I bought a barrel of mackerel and some lined paper for writing. And when I came home, I bought some 9 or 10 bushels of grain and 5 or 6 bushels of taters and a pound of tea. And I went down to see him, and they in want.
So this is part of Joseph Knight Senior's reminiscence, and he's telling about how in the beginning of that Book of Mormon, so the end of 1828 and into 1829, he is providing some means, and sometimes significant means, for Joseph and Emma, and then Joseph and Emma and Oliver, and also Samuel's also there. So this is because, remember, the previous year in 1828, Joseph is producing the Book of Mormon text with Martin Harris during April through to June. Joseph hasn't put down crops in the ground. He doesn't have anything to eat in winter. He has no resources because he and Martin have been producing the Book of Mormon, not working in the farm so that they would have plenty during the winter. And so this is what I'm talking about. These people are on their bare bones, and the Hale family are sick of Joseph. They're probably sympathetic to Emma's plight, but they're sick of Joseph, and they're not giving them any assistance because it's Joseph's own fault that they don't have any food over winter. And Joseph Knight Senior is their savior. He saves Joseph and Emma, and then even after Oliver comes and has all that money, but remember he's put it towards the mortgage, they don't have any money either. So then he's providing food, he's providing paper. This is Joseph Knight Senior as a major help and financial help to the project. And do you want to read that last? This is Joseph Smith talking about Joseph Knight Senior in 1838.
I would just mention here, as in duty bound, that he several times brought us supplies, a distance of at least 30 miles, which enabled us to continue the work when otherwise we must have relinquished it for a season.
Yeah. So this is Joseph Knight Senior. Now remember, if we go back a couple of things, those 4 men we have, Oliver Cowdery, we know is financially vested. Joseph Knight Senior, also financially invested. Okay, now this is Joseph Smith's letter to Oliver Cowdery on the 22nd of October, 1829. So Joseph writes to Oliver. Oliver's in Palmyra, working on the printer's manuscript and working with the printer. Joseph Smith is down at his Harmony cottage, which I've got a picture of it there at the bottom, right? And he's told Oliver that he's arrived there on the 6th of October, and he's telling Oliver about some of the developments that have happened in Harmony since they left, because they left at the 1st of June, and he's been away basically 4 months at this point. but this is one of the things that Joseph tells Oliver. And can you read this, Smith?
Yep. So this is his letter to Oliver. The people are very much excited when they find that there is a copyright obtained and that there is really books about to be printed. I have bought a horse off Mr. Josiah Stoll and want someone to come after it as soon as convenient. Mr. Stoll has a prospect of getting $500 or $600. He does not know certain that he can get it, but he is going to try, and if he can get the money, he wants to pay it in immediately for books.
So so Joseph so this is Josiah Stoll. So this is the Harmony dig back in 1825. Josiah Stoll lives nearby. Joseph Knight Senior, about in the over the border into New York, and so now Joseph is reconnecting with Josiah and telling him about where they're at with the production of the Book of Mormon, and he's telling Oliver that Josiah Stoll wants to buy books, because they're going to buy it at one price and then sell it at another price. This is going to be income producing of some kind. He's not doing it out of the goodness of his heart. He really thinks that this is going to be an investment. So now we don't have any record that says that Josiah Stoll did this, right? We have no idea whether Josiah Stoll gave Joseph $500 or $600, or he gave him $50, or he gave him $100, or he gave him nothing. There is nothing in the historical record that indicates this, or we just have no record, right? However, see these two pictures that I've got on the right here. The bottom one is the Harmony cottage that Joseph has. It's you can see it's two-story. It's a frame house. It's got a little lean-to on the left-hand side. That is their cottage. So one of the things that happens when Joseph goes back to Harmony in October of 1829, when this letter is written, soon after, in the next month, November or December, he manages to acquire a house nearby, or a frame of a house, and he drags it to his Harmony house and attaches it onto the side of it. Can you see there that photograph from this photograph is from 1893, and this shows that you could, if you can, give a good indication here, you can see the original part, and you can see the add-on. You see the add-on? It's the two-story on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side.
Here, this part in this photo.
Yeah. So this is a photograph of the house in 1893. So photographs aren't around in 1829, but later on somebody photographs the house. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Can you see that the bottom house is there? But you can see the original house and the little lean-to on the left, and then there's a whole two-story thing attached to the other side of it. They're the same house. Does that make sense?
Right. So this one here is the same house as this one.
Yes.
The one up here. And are you talking about this extension, the little one on the left, or are you talking about this right part of the house was a full extension?
This big extension on the right side of the house, the two-story part on the right side of the house, is an extension.
And you're saying this happened, what, like a month or two after this letter was written by Joseph?
Correct. That's what we know. This Joseph, this is what in early 19th century America, this is called a salt house, and basically it's been dragged probably in the ice and the winter from a neighbor's property, and attached to the Smith Harmony home. So the inference is that Joseph has bought from his neighbor a house that's not being used and dragged it or had it moved through and attached it onto his house to provide 8 to 12 new bedrooms.
What could I ask, Ganesh, your source on that? Because I haven't come across this specific venture before about the dragging of the house. I haven't heard about that.
Yeah, neither had I.
Yes.
What is
No,
this?
no, nobody talks about this because nobody knows, right?
Okay. Well, what are your sources on that? How do you know this?
How do I know this? So Mark Staker did a paper on this, some time ago, talking about the he does a massive deep dive in his paper about the finances around the Harmony House, and he provides the mortgage documents, when it was bought and sold, what when it was appraised, how the house. So Mark Staker does this. Mark Staker is a faithful, I think he might be a BYU professor, and he talks about the evolution of the Harmony Cottage and when it happened, why it happened, and what happened. And he confirms that that Joseph added onto. Remember, Joseph has no money. Joseph has nothing, right? He can't even come up with the dollars on the original agreement on the 6th of April 1829, when he's signing his mortgage with Isaac Hale, his father-in-law. But in November or December of 1829, Joseph is adding this massive addition to his house.
And this is Mark's PhD thesis, perhaps, is it? Or is it?
It's an article in the Dialogue or the Journal of the John Whitmer Journal.
Okay.
When I send it to you guys, then you can attach it as an evidence, right? Anyway, I guess you're going to have to take my word for it. But
this is completely new to me, and I'm just trying to understand. See what Joseph's writing in the letter. Is he saying basically that Josiah Stoll is expecting to get from to give them $500 or $600 for the printing of the Book of Mormon, or is he talking about that he's expecting to get that in returns? What's he saying exactly in this letter?
So look, you've got to realize that the Book of Mormon is a financial project. It's not a like it may be a spiritual project too, right? But it's a financial project. Josiah Stoll, Josiah Stoll is also not, he's not overly flush, but obviously he's got some access to some money. And, he's a treasure digger. He wants, that's why he got Joseph Smith in the first place, to come down and dig for treasure. He's trying to make some money. That what Joseph is saying is that basically Josiah Stoll is going to put $500 or $600. This may be exaggerated, but $500 or $600 towards paying it in immediately for books, right? So he's going to put his money in and get a whole lot of books, because they're expecting that these books are going to be like hotcakes, and they're going to
sell.
They're going to sell really. They're going to sell really well, because this is an amazing new project and understanding an idea, and that we're going to talk about this in a minute. But the price of this book is $1.75, and the printing of it is basically 60 cents. So effectively, you could make a bit of money on the sale of a book. So if he's putting in hundreds of dollars into this and then selling it for a profit, he's going to get some money. Josiah Stoll believes that this is a financial endeavor. He's going to get money from this project. Everybody does. And so we don't know, because there's no documentation, But I'm saying, how did Joseph get any money to make whatever happens to his house? So this addition to his house in um, in November or December of 1829. How can he afford to do this? He can't. He has no money. He only has money that people are giving to him or providing for him. So that, and look, we should state, why is he doing this, right? He's doing this because his parents are basically evicted from their house. They are homeless. He's going to move his Palmyra parents and his younger siblings to his house. So this adds 8 to 12 more bedrooms to his cottage. You know, he doesn't need that. What does he need it for? You know, there's only him and Emma. They don't even have any children yet. Why does he need a house with
so Ganesh,
8 more bedrooms?
Other histories of Joseph Smith do talk about his family coming to Harmony at that time, and I think they stay for about 3 months, something like that. And as a consequence of that, it's during that period that Lucy Mack Smith writes in her history about the Hales, and it's very sort of bowled over by the Hales and their prosperity and their intellect, etc. But the other histories that I've read don't actually mention anything about this sort of extension to the house or this addition to the house. Do you have any idea why some of the other histories have not gone into that kind of detail that you cited? Mark, I didn't get his name, but this guy Mark
Staker. Yeah.
Mark Staker. Yeah.
Yes. I don't know. I think that, you know, I don't know. It just might be that later on, you know, one of the problems that this house has, so this is an 1893 photo of it, but there's foundations underneath the cottage, but there's no foundations underneath the extension. So it's quite possible. I think that, you know, later when the house deteriorates and the extension is a problem because it doesn't have a foundation. So so later when the church restores the house, that photo there is what it looks like today. It's a restoration, but they've only just put on the cottage and the lean-to, just like it was when Joseph and Emma you know, were producing the Book of Mormon in early 1829. They don't, you know, show the house like it was in 1830.
Got it. Thank
This is
you.
interesting. I'm gonna have to look at this ladder and read through the article because this is pretty much all new to me. Which it's nice when you hear about something that's new and you're unfamiliar with.
It's very exciting.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ganesh.
Yeah. Now, and look, we only have pieces of information, so I'm making links, but I think that they're reasonable links, and that is that Josiah Stoll must have given Joseph some money. It may not have been $500 or $600, but it must have been some money, because then Joseph had enough money to be able to attach this house to his own house and make it like a mansion, right? This is now got, you know, multiple, and I think he's doing that because he's really wants to relocate his parents and his family to Harmony. I mean, Mark Staker makes the case in his article that this was supposed to be the first headquarters of the church. And there's some, you know, like in June of 1830, Joseph is there with Emma. There, you know, Oliver's there, John Whitmer's there, David Whitmer's there. So there's quite a few people there. You know, they've got all these bedrooms. But I think that the more reasonable assumption is that Joseph is planning to relocate his homeless parents to Harmony. But that plan doesn't come to fruition for a number of reasons, and it's probably outside the scope of this podcast. But they end up abandoning the Harmony property in August of 1830, and you know, all of the people that are joining the church are in either Fayette or Colesville, so they basically go elsewhere. They don't stay in Harmony. But But I think that was Joseph's initial intention, was he's going to provide for his family who are desperate and homeless. So that's just what this was all about. But I would suggest that Josiah Stoll has become a financial investor. That's my exception. That's it. If I'm linking these two events, Joseph Smith's letter on 22nd of October and this extension to the house together, would suggest that Josiah Stoll is a investor now in this project. And if we go back a few slides, that would account for the reason why he's going to Canada to secure the copyright in February of 1830. So we've got Oliver Cowdery, we know he's a financial investor. Joseph Knight Sr. is a financial investor. Josiah Stoll looks like a financial investor. Hiram Page is the only one that we don't have any kind of documentational link that says, but he's the odd one out. The one thing about Hiram Page, which is really interesting, he's the Whitmer's son-in-law. He's married to Catherine Whitmer. He is a doctor. So out of the whole of the Whitmer family, he's probably the only one who's got he's probably the only one who's got any money. The Whitmers are incredibly poor. They're just as poor as the Smiths. But Hiram Page is at least, got some profession that perhaps has got some money attached to it. So it's interesting that he's in that mix. And we don't see any of the Whitmers in that mix, and we don't see any of the Smiths in that mix. But we definitely see Oliver, Joseph Knight, Hiram, and Josiah Stoll.
I'll just ask one last question on this. I don't want to spend too long on this because we've got so many more slides to get through. But you're saying that the extension that was put on Josiah Stoll's property, that Joseph Smith was the one supplying and helping to build and bring in the materials? What's the sources?
No,
am I misunderstanding?
The other way around. So this is Joseph Smith's house. Joseph Smith's put an extension onto his house. I'm just saying, where did the money come from? Right? Where did the money come from for Joseph Smith to put this extension on his house?
I see.
Well, the two things that we have this letter in the end of October saying that Josiah Stoll is going to put some money up, and we have Josiah Stoll going on this Canadian copyright, basically treasure dig, in February of 1830. Josiah Stoll is the most likely source of the finances that enabled Joseph to add to his house.
Is that Mark Staker's postulation as well, Ganesh?
No. So he doesn't make that connection whatsoever. I'm making that connection. Okay. Mark Staker doesn't make that connection. He doesn't say in his paper where the money comes from. Actually, I haven't asked him that question. I should ask him that. He's a really nice guy. Just, where does the money come from? I think.
Okay, so that's sort of like your theory or hypothesis. What you're.
Yes. Follow the money. If you had, this is my reasonable assumption. It could be wrong. He might have got some money from somewhere else, but just the fact that Josiah Stoll, he's talking about Josiah Stoll giving him some money in October. He's now put a extension on his house. Then when the concern over the return of money happens in January of 1830, and Joseph Smith is trying to address this in February of 1830, he gets Oliver Cowdery, who is an investor, Joseph Knight Sr., and Josiah Stoll and Hiram Page to go to Canada for the copyright. Those things seem like they are connected because they offer a chain of reasonable financial collaboration.
All right.
Okay. So we don't have to. Here we can pass through this. This is family critics. So we talked right at the very beginning about Isaac Hale and Jesse Smith and the fact that they believed that Joseph Smith was producing the Book of Mormon, and it was him. He's the origin. Isaac Hale in his statement, his 1834 statement, he makes the case, and I'll just read the bold. People can read the whole thing if they want. We'll go back to the original statements that that it was got up for speculation and with a design to dupe the credulous and unwary, and in order that its fabricators might live upon the spoils of those who swallowed the deception. So Isaac Hale makes the case that the Book of Mormon is for financial, things. I mean, he's a critic and he's a skeptic. So this is not unusual, but just saying that there are people in Joseph's family, in his family circle, his father-in-law, and also his brother, his uncle Jesse Smith, in his 1829 letter, says basically, this, trying to explain what's going on with the Smiths. He said, this angel of the Lord, devil it should be, has put me in possession of great wealth, gold and silver and precious stones, so that I shall have dominion in all the land of Palmyra. So the idea that, Jesse Smith is also seeing this connection that the Smiths are incredibly poor, and they're looking at this gold Bible as a speculation and as a mechanism to enrich themselves, and that's their take on why this is all happening. It's the critic take, but it's a take.
Okay.
So here's so we have a few accounts of other people surround. This is Abigail Harris. So she makes a statement in 1833 about, and I just pulled this out because the connection between money and the Book of Mormon, and maybe even what Joseph's family is thinking they're going to get out of it.
Is she
Particularly his extended
a
family,
relation of Martin Harris?
Yes, so she's Martin Harris's sister-in-law.
Okay.
Right. And she is privy to Martin Harris and his involvement with this. So maybe, if you want to read her statement.
Yeah. So
this.
the old lady, Lucy Mack Smith, said also that after the book was translated, the plates were to be publicly exhibited, admittance 25 cents. She calculated it would bring in annually an enormous sum of money. That money would then be very plenty, and the book would also sell for a great price, as it was something entirely new, that they had been commanded to obtain all the money they could borrow for present necessity and to repay with gold. The old lady took me into another room, and after closing the door, she said, "Have you $4 or $5 in money that you can lend until our business is brought to a close? The Spirit has said you shall receive fourfold." In the second month following, Martin Harris and his wife were at my house in conversation about Mormonites. She observed that she wished her husband would quit them, as she believed it was all false and a delusion. To which I heard Mr. Harris reply, "What if it is a lie? If you will let me alone, I will make money out of it." I was both an eye and an ear witness of what has been stated above, which is now fresh in my memory, and I give it to the world for the good of mankind. I speak the truth and lie not, God bearing me witness.
So yeah, when you listen, when you hear statements of other people, outside the kind of the immediate production of the Book of Mormon, talk about their experience with the Smiths or with Mountain Harris, they're telling a slightly different story about what is going on here. That it really is about it's about money. They're expecting some kind of return on this, and this is absolutely usual because they're desperate. The Smiths are desperate, so this is not unusual. But yeah, I just use this for context.
Right,
Any
so you
questions on that?
would use that to corroborate the other accounts that they think there could have been some financial reward coming from the Book of Mormon, and also the plates. I guess that's something that never happened, about showing the plates to people for money. I think, what would you say to a believer or an apologist who might view this and just say, like, well, what if this person is just critical about Mormonism and biased against, and how accurate or how much is this hearsay? I guess she's saying that she did observed Martin relate this to his wife. But what if they said, do we have any other accounts that corroborate what she's claiming about like this conversation?
So the one about Martin Harris, yes, it is corroborated. So Lucy Harris, Martin Harris' wife, also makes a statement to that effect. So, and that's what it says anyway, that that's who are in the room. Abigail Harris, Martin Harris, Lucy Harris, and so Abigail and Lucy both attest to that.
Okay.
Statement
Similar
from
thing was said.
Martin Harris.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, David, this is G.D. Stoddard's statement from, actually the same day in 1833. And this is just talking about Martin Harris and his character, which is kind of interesting.
I have been acquainted with Martin Harris about 30 years. As a farmer, he was industrious and enterprising, so much so that he had, previous to his going into the gold Bible speculation, accumulated in real estate some $8,000 or $10,000. Although he possessed wealth, his moral and religious character was such as not to entitle him to respect among his neighbors. He was fretful, peevish, and quarrelsome, not only in the neighborhood, but in his family. He was known to frequently abuse his wife by whipping her, kicking her out of bed, and turning her out of doors, etc. Yet he was a public professor of some religion. He was first an Orthodox Quaker, then a Universalist, next a Restorationer, then a Baptist, next a Presbyterian, and then a Mormon, close quote.
Yeah, so, lots of other people, again, this is just suggesting, Martin Harris had some acumen, produced some things. But he also was not looked upon as a great guy by his neighbors. Lucy Harris also, in her statement, talks about how he abused her. I mean, she's at that point in 1833 divorced from Martin. Martin, lost his mortgage, and he also, his wife divorced him, and he's moved to Ohio. So, again, and I get your point, Murph. These are critics. They're speaking about somebody who's no longer in their community, who they think is a bit delusional. But it's just really interesting to kind of get a feel for the ways that they are presenting, Martin Harris and the Book of Mormon and ways that they're explaining it. And these are definitely biased. I'm not saying they're not, but I'm just saying that
we also can't outright
also
dismiss them or reject them.
It's
I've read many statements of many neighbors and people that knew Martin who also had said a lot of positive things about him being, very honest, hardworking, and industrious farmer. He's sort of referencing that. So this quote, it might come across more antagonistic, but I don't think it means we should necessarily completely reject it. And you're saying that it corroborates some of the things that Lucy said about Martin Harris and possible abuse as well.
Yeah, absolutely. David, do you want to say something?
I was going to say pretty much the same thing, that it's a counterbalance to the largely more positive references to Martin Harris that we are used to receiving in the church.
Yeah. And I only do this to suggest that if you only have one particular narrative, in Mormonism, one of the crazy things that I see, particularly as a historian looking at these early accounts, because he's a contemporary, is that you're obviously going to pick the ones that make you look the best. But lots of the ways that we understand the Book of Mormon and its coming forth are things that have kind of been polished a bit later and backdated into the historic record. When you look at them in its, in the kinds of things that are happening at the time, you can see a different story, or you could explain it in a different way, and that's what I'm just trying to do in a hopefully a responsible way.
Yes,
This is a statement from Joseph Capron. Oh, sorry.
No, I think that's a good point that you make, and I think there is also maybe a counterbalanced point that should also be made about sources for every historian, because every historian comes to their task laden with biases, because we are all laden with loads of
Yeah.
biases. I did a thing on biases, a YouTube video last year on biases, and went through about 30 different types of biases that we all suffer from. And I was chagrined to accept that I probably suffered from all 30 of them. And I mean,
Yeah.
one of my questions is to what extent, as a historian, when you set out to write a book, as you have done, a thesis, which is it's not entirely new, but it is more it's more sharp and it's more detailed about Joseph being the author of the Book of Mormon. One of the questions I had was, how did you deal with your biases, and how did you decide on which sources you would include and which sources you wouldn't include? And presumably, as you've just referred here, presumably you're going to include the sources that validate your thesis rather than the sources that validate other theses. But could you just maybe comment on how you approach that challenge?
Yeah, that's a really good one, and thanks for bringing it up, David. So yes, well, and like, as a person who's trying to suggest, okay, well, I, I try to be thoughtful, I try to be fair, but like you said, you're going to have biases. So how do you deal with them? Well, there's two ways to do that. Well, firstly, I'm going to try and find a consistent understanding, and that's what I did during the book, was go, okay, well, what am I seeing? What's the consistent understanding? And can I sharpen that by using, contemporary sources? So my suggestion would be, and the way that my book follows, is the chronology. The chronology is really important to me, to go, this is what happened then, this is what happened next, this is what happened next, this is what happened next. Here's the earliest account of that thing happening here. This seems to have happened next, but the source is maybe 50 years later. I try and reference it so that you can see that here it is in order. Here is the source. Here is the date of the source, because the date of the source, like these ones that we're looking at here, are 1833. So they're contemporary, right? They're pretty close to the actual time frame, 1829, 1830, really close. So that makes them more valuable than if they are 1881, so let's say. But they're still 4 years later, and things have happened, bias have written, and all those kinds of things. So how do you do that? Well, you just have to present it. This is what people are telling 3 years later, and try and for me, try and be as open about the idea that if there's a chronology, fitting things into the timeline. This is when we know about these things, and this is the position. I mean, I will say, look, this is not in the chronology. Like in Stephen, you did a wonderful podcast with Dan Vogel over the priesthood restoration, and the reality is these things weren't, things like the Melchizedek priesthood, Aaronic priesthood, the visitations of John the Baptist and Peter, James, and John, those don't appear in the historical record till 1834 and into 1835. So, while they're talking about events which are in 1829, they don't appear in the historic record till 1834. So I have to when I'm doing the chronology, that's what I'm also showing. I'm saying, okay, this is what somebody said later. This is where it exists in the chronology, and actually it makes better sense if you follow these this evolving pattern that's coming along. Now, people can disagree, and I think they should. I'm just, as a person who wants to know as much and the most accurate assessment of what's going on, this is what I'm trying to do. If I've done that badly or wrong, then people should point it out. And the reason that I peer reviewed so much of it with different scholars on different subjects was with that endeavor to try and make it less biased. But you can never eliminate bias, so you can only reduce it, and hopefully I managed to do that.
Thank you.
This Joseph Capron statement is just interesting too, and it's also corroborated by other people. But you can see it in some of the Hales extended family rhetoric as well around the same thing. He says, Joseph writes, while they were digging for money, they were daily harassed by the demands of creditors, which they were never able to pay. At length, Joseph pretended to find the gold plates. This scheme, he believed, would relieve the family from all pecuniary embarrassment. His father told me that when the book was published, they would be enabled from the profits of the work to carry on it into successful operation, the money-digging business. He gave me no intimation at the time that the book was to be of a religious character, or that it had anything to do with revelation. He declared it to be a speculation and said, when it is complete, my family will be placed on a level above the generality of mankind. Now, this seems to echo really the sentiment that Jesse Smith says in his 1829 letter. So there's some crossover, and there's no indication that Joseph Capron ever met Jesse Smith or vice versa. So that's why I might also correlate and give some legitimacy to some statements, because they're being done. Similar ideas are coming through from different people in completely different locations who are not likely to have any access with each other. There's a very similar statement that's done by Emma's cousins. It's later, though. It's 1881, and it basically says, look, that all of the angels and those kinds of things, we didn't hear about that till much later. That wasn't a part of our indication of what this whole project was about when he was in Harmony, Pennsylvania. This is, I'll just read this one too. This is Henry Harris's statement of 1833. He said, after the book was published, I frequently begged him, this is Joseph Smith, for a copy. He asked 14 shillings a piece for them, which is $1.75. I told him I would not give so much. He told me that he had a revelation that they must be sold at that price. Sometime afterwards, I talked with Martin Harris about buying one of the books, and he told me that they had a new revelation that they might be sold at 10 shillings a piece for $1.25. And we know from the actual sales of the books that this is accurate, that it was initially 175 and then it was dropped to 125. So this is really interesting. This is just, again, corroborating some of the information. But the interesting thing that Henry Harris says that that Joseph's getting a revelation that they must be sold at this particular price, and then he's getting a revelation later that changes that because they're not selling.
Interesting.
Okay, so here's a little bit of a wrap up of this particular segment, and an overview of this. These are the time and money investments that are that we can document, right? We can document that Joseph and Martin Harris, they spent April to June of 1828 working on what became the lost manuscript, right? And we've talked a little bit about how important these are to the farming calendar, and how this really played into Joseph not having very much by the end of the year and needing Joseph Knight Sr.'s help. These are significant. This is massive amounts of time given to a project which, effectively had no outcome or no benefit. But these are massive investments of time and money. Joseph and Oliver, they did a similar April to July 1829. They're not farming. They're not putting crops in the ground. They are working on the Book of Mormon. The Whitmers, they provide their home in June of 1829. This is going to impact their crop sowing, their housing, their support, their logistics. So it's a significant, sacrifice for them. Oliver Cowdery and Hiram Smith, they then spent August 1829 through to March of 1830, producing a printer's manuscript of going back and forth to the printer, every day and delivering pages. This is a massive selection of time. Oliver would have been teaching school at this particular point, like he had been the previous year, making money, making ends meet. But they're producing the Book of Mormon at the printers. Joseph, we know he's there in Palmyra area from after he leaves the Whitmer farm. From July through to September, he's organizing the publishing, along with Martin Harris. This is a significant amount of time. He's not even in Harmony, right? Emma's back down there. She's taking care of the little dairy business that they have that's giving them some income, but not much. And then Joseph comes back up again to Palmyra during January and February. That's when we had this copyright dispute from Abner Cole, where we had these selling concerns, and they're doing this agreement for Martin Harris, and then we have the Canadian copyright expedition or treasure dig that doesn't work. So these are all significant time investments when they could have been producing money, but they're not. They're working on the publication, and this involves a lot of people. Then we have these other money investments that we've talked about. Joseph, so Oliver, basically his whole savings from his teaching the year before goes into the mortgage on the Harmony property. Martin's, mortgaging his farm, $3,000 for the printing of the Book of Mormon. David, that housing and feeding and preaching that he's doing, that's a significant investment. Joseph Knight Sr., his financial support that we talked about already. Josiah Stoll, I'm making that link between the $500 and the horse and the house. And Hiram Page, we don't know of anything, but we do know that he went to Canada, which, seen as all of the other people that are going and involved in that have put something towards it, suggests that Hiram Page has also done that. So my question is, what has God provided to this project?
You're talking about in terms of financial investment?
Yeah. Or time.
Well, I suppose to believers, if you believe in the divine origin, they would view the actual origin of the plates and the divine intervention in the translation, those sorts of things. But in terms of like money, obviously not.
So that's one of the really interesting parts of this, right? There are gold plates, and people are losing their farms over this, right? Martin Harris will lose his farm. He doesn't know this in 1829 when he puts up his mortgage, but he does. He loses his farm because the Book of Mormon is not a financial success. And yet, God, he's got gold plates. They could. Why didn't God just provide another leaf of the plates that they could use for all of the financial necessities they need, so that they don't have to. So Martin Harris doesn't have to lose his farm or his marriage or his or everything really. That these people don't have to scrimp and try and just make ends meet. but Joseph has got this powerful seer stone that's supposed to, transverse time and space, and yet it can't tell him things that are that are outside his own knowledge, but also can't provide him any means financially to be able to provide for this. He's using the stone to send these guys out to Canada to sell the copyright revelation, and that completely fails too. So anything that they try to do to produce money just seems to fail. The Book of Mormon was a financial, sink. Like it didn't, it cost them heaps of time and energy and money, and it didn't return. Yeah, when you're looking at just the money aspect of this endeavor, it is really problematic. Like yeah, just really tricky. God just does not seem to care. Well, or these are outside of Joseph's control, and God never delivers anything out of Joseph's control. Which is
it seems like
problematic.
there was not a financial success or profit from the selling of the Book of Mormon. What do you think about is it the 1838 history? It's probably a couple of them where Joseph says that the angel tells him that, or in obtaining the plates, he must have an eye single to the glory of God and not desire it to get rich. Now, obviously, he's relating to his account years later, but there almost seems in there that you'll be tempted to want to sell them to get rich, or people will want to get them from you, but this is God's work, and you must have an eye single to the glory of God and not do this in order to get yourself rich. And some of you, that was part of the reason why it took Joseph so many years in order to obtain the plates, was because of the treasure digging and the desires for getting rich from this, and the desires to get his family out of poverty. But a believing perspective would be like the plates were never intended to enrich people, but it was
about money.
to be used for the purposes of God.
And I would say that's classic apologetics, right? Because it's trying to excuse the reason why this didn't financially work. Why, why didn't it financially work? Oh, because it was never about money. It was about spirituality. Yeah, well, you say that now, later, when it's a financial drain, but everything that you were doing during the process, was with the idea that you're going to get some money for it. Like, if we go back to this one here, right, which is Henry Harris's statement, Joseph is getting a revelation, according to Henry Harris, that the Book of Mormon is supposed to sell for $1.75, and then he's getting another revelation that the Book of Mormon is to sell for $1.75 and then $1.25. So according to this and other revelations that we talked about, God seems to be really, invested in the particulars of the Book of Mormon and giving Joseph revelation in order for this to make it happen. Doctrine and Covenants section 19 is basically God telling Martin Harris he has to finance his property, and that he's that this is he has to do this. Why does Martin have to do that? Why can't God come up with $3,000? That seemed like a nothing, but Martin has to do it. Martin has to be coerced to do it. This is a problem. And so, yeah, these are really, I mean, if I'm thinking about, because I'm an investor, I make, I provide for my family. I want to provide for it well. Gosh, some of the things I've done have fallen over in the past. Some of the things have gone better than I expected. That's just life. So, and you have to live. These people have to live. They're poor farmers, and they can't afford to give months and months of their time to something that is not going to allow them to eat. This is just, so it's dire. This is really dire.
So I'm curious to get your thoughts on Because it does seem from the sources you presented that they were hoping for and expecting a financial return or profit from this. I'm curious, what's your thoughts on, because it seemed that after the failure of the Kirtland Bank, there was a lot of apostasy and dissension. Even some of the witnesses who began to question Joseph being a prophet or being a fallen prophet during this time. Do you have any thoughts or any theories why none of them seem to abandon, believing in the Book of Mormon, even if the prophets didn't come? Because I would argue that even if that might have been a disappointment from this, it seems that for Oliver, Martin, and for David, they seem to be quite adamant and throughout their lives that they really believed that they had a visionary experience and they really believed the Book of Mormon was divine. Now, this might have been a bit of a blow to, okay, why didn't, the copyright sell? Or certainly when it came to things like with the Kirtland Bank failure, causing them to call into question Joseph as a prophet. But it seems that, the failure of them not getting huge financial returns didn't seem to have an impact on their faith or their testimony in the Book of Mormon, or questioning the translation being divine, or their own visionary experiences, or the reality of the plates.
Well, that's human nature, right? We're really when we believe something deep in our soul and we've rehearsed that to ourselves again and again and again, it's really difficult to go, oh, that didn't happen, or maybe I was wrong, or look, if I go back and look at the evidence, it's there's that sunk cost fallacy. We believe that when we've invested in something that we have done it, wholeheartedly and sincerely, and maybe there's some other reason why it hasn't come to pass, and we just have to have more faith. So instead of abandoning, we double down. And and look, they'd had good experiences too. It wasn't that, I mean, look, all of these experiences that they had, some of them were terrible and didn't come out the way that they expected, but that's also all of our lives. So look, one of the things, and look, we're going on, how are we doing for time? Yeah, 2 hours.
Yeah, we may have to wrap up soon, because I think we still got quite a lot of slides left, so we might have to do a part two.
Yeah, and I think maybe that I can answer that in the part two of what's the underlying core feelings that they're having, and because I'm going to talk about the witnesses and their actual physical experience. That's the next part I was going to talk about. Maybe we could close off with this part, and then with the finances part, and then we'll seek to answer that question by another podcast about what's happening to them and their souls. What's how are they feeling about this? So I just wanted to point out what happened after the Book of Mormon, and maybe this is a much larger discussion, which I'll just throw out for a teaser, maybe, and you can think about it. But when I'm looking at the timeline of the Book of Mormon production, one of the things that I see is that Joseph is really intent on the publication of the Book of Mormon, and he seems to have no future vision past that. He just believes in the publication and that it's going to provide for his needs and his family's needs. That's the indication I get from his behavior. And we see from Doctrine and Covenants, section 18, that he gives the charge to Oliver Cowdery and David Whitmer to establish the church. And David Whitmer, when he does his address to all believers in 1881, there's two things that are really interesting about his document. It's well worthwhile reading. One is that he thoroughly believes in the seer stone. He believes that the seer stone is the key to God, and when Joseph stops using the seer stone by about April of 1830, that Joseph is now no longer getting all the revelation from God, and he's put himself above it. The other thing that David Whitmer says is that from the time that they get that revelation in June of 1829, Oliver and David, they ordain 6 elders. they are preaching from that point on. The church is established then. He says the church is not established on the 6th of April, 1830. The church is established in June of 1829. And they just legitimize the church on April 6th because it needs to have a legal backing from the state of New York. But they're preaching, they believe that the church has already started. It doesn't start in April. It starts in June. And so Joseph is really concerned about the production of the Book of Mormon. And when it doesn't sell, when the Book of Mormon doesn't produce any financial benefit, because it really is, people just don't buy it because it's really expensive, and B, they don't like it. So it's a financial flop. Then Joseph gets involved in the production of the church, which tends to happen around April 1830 and April 6th, as we know. So, and it's not that Joseph's not a believer or that he doesn't think this is wonderful or that he's not preaching. These are all things that are happening, but his involvement increases after April because the Book of Mormon itself is not producing a income like he thought it would. It's producing some income, but it's tiny in comparison to the expectations that it would. So we see in Doctrine and Covenants section 24, which is July of 1830, that, remember, Joseph's put this addition onto his house. He's fully expecting to stay in harmony for the rest of his life. I think he's planning to relocate his parents and his younger siblings because they're homeless to Harmony, and he's going to live there on this. He likes Harmony, and the persecution that he felt the previous year, that's dissipated, and he's feeling a lot more comfortable. But at the end of June 1830, Joseph gets hauled into court in Colesville and then in South Bainbridge twice. He gets roughed up. This is a massive understanding that he's not going to get any peace. And he basically hides himself away in July of 1830. He's got Oliver Cowdery and John Whitmer there with him, and Emma Smith. They're all in this house in Harmony, Pennsylvania, and he gets these revelations. And this is Doctrine and Covenants section 24. That because he doesn't know what to do. What is he going to do? Harmony's not safe. He can't stay there, even though he's put this big addition onto the side of his house, and he was expecting to stay there, but it's not safe. He can't guarantee his safety there. So what is he going to do? Well, gets a revelation. Magnify thine office, and after thou hast sowed thy fields and secured them, go speedily unto the church which is in Colesville, Fayette, and Manchester, and they shall support thee, and I will bless thee. I will bless them both spiritually and temporally. But if they receive thee not, I will send upon them a cursing instead of a blessing. So we're seeing this blessing and cursing thing, coercion thing that God seems to be engaged in. And in temporal labours thou shalt not have strength. This is not thy calling. Attend to thy calling, and thou shalt have wherewith to magnify thy office. And thou shalt take no personal scrip, nor staves, nor coats, for the church shall give unto thee in the very hour what thou needest for food and for raiment and for shoes and money and for script. So Joseph is basically getting a revelation, section 24, that says that the church will support him as a spiritual leader. And this is completely contrary to the Book of Mormon, because the Book of Mormon suggests that priests should not get paid. They should work alongside their flocks, and they will support themselves and be blessed by God in that endeavor. But by July 1830, Joseph is not getting enough money from the Book of Mormon publication. He's worried about his safety and Harmony. He feels like he needs to leave, which they do, and he abandons Harmony in August of 1830. And he needs to be supported financially, and so he gets this revelation that suggests that he will. And that's how he manages to support himself going forward. I mean, eventually they go to Ohio because New York is not safe. But this is the new basis for the church. This is totally in opposition to the Book of Mormon. the Book of Mormon calls ministers of the church getting paid priestcraft. And yet, reasonably, Joseph has no other means of support except for the church. And so he gets a revelation that the church will support him. This, once they go to Ohio, this is even more so. Like, actually, one other thing that's really important that happens at this particular time, in June of 1830, Joseph starts a new project, and that is the Joseph Smith's translation of the Bible. So he believes that, so the Book of Mormon was the first project. It's not getting money, but he knows now how to produce stuff that is scripture. And the other, while origins of the Native Americans have been really popular, also things like Clark's commentary are also really popular. And so Joseph is, we know from people like Colby Townsend that Joseph is using and the research from Lamont and Weymouth, that Joseph is using a Clark's commentary. And so basically Joseph is starting on his new version of a commentary of the Bible. That's his Joseph Smith translation. And he's expanding that with the Book of Moses, which is effectively a vision or an expansion of Genesis, the beginning of Genesis. And that is produced in June of 1830. So just before he gets hauled into court at the end of June, and before he feels like he needs to leave Harmony in July. This is his next big endeavor. He doesn't want to be a farmer, and he can be a minister, but actually he needs to produce something. So the Joseph Smith translation is the thing that he's working on. So when Sidney Rigdon comes to meet him in New York and Fayette in December of 1830, he gets Sidney Rigdon to help him with the Joseph Smith translation, and that becomes the next project for the church, something that he can produce that is going to make money. Now, there's a lot of stuff that happens on the basis of the church move to Ohio, and of course they've also sent those missionaries out through to Missouri. So then there's a lot going on. But by a conference in the end of 1831, so this is November, December 1831, they decide to print the commandments, the revelations that Joseph has got up until this point, and produce them to produce to the world. In fact, they plan on producing 10,000 copies. So this is twice the print run of the Book of Mormon. They actually peel that back to 3,000 copies, but this is going to be done by W. Phelps in Independence, Missouri, because the printing press is in Missouri, because Missouri needs some industry, because it's not as civilized or as sophisticated as Ohio. So the printing press is there. The church printing press is in Independence, Missouri, running by W. Phelps, and the revelations is something now that they think that they can make some money off, because people will want to hear the revelations that God has for the people in this last day. So they're going to print these revelations. So they make a plan at the December conference of 1831 to set up a printing and mercantile business. This is called the United Firm. Later on, it's changed to the United Order, but it's actually an income producing endeavor where they're going to print the commandments. So this becomes the Book of Commandments, and they're going to print the Joseph Smith translation of the Bible, which Joseph is finishing off at this particular point. These are the next two printing endeavors of Joseph and the church, and it's a business. This is supposed to return money to people, W. Phelps, to Joseph Smith, to Oliver Cowdery, and also to Martin Harris, because Martin Harris has lost majorly on the Book of Mormon project. So he's now getting in on the Book of Commandment project and the Joseph Smith translation project, which are going to be printed in independence in Jackson County, Missouri. But of course, we know that in June of 18, sorry, July of 1833, the people of Independence, Missouri, fed up with the Mormons and what they're doing. They take the printing press, they destroy it in the streets,
Yeah.
and the Book of Commandments doesn't quite get finished. The Joseph Smith translation never gets printed, and of course, what happens later is the Book of Commandments morphs into the Doctrine and Covenants, which gets printed in 1835 in Ohio instead. And by this point, things have changed so dramatically with regard to the theology of the church. The Joseph Smith translation of the Bible never gets printed. It doesn't. But what I'm saying is, what we see leading up to the publication of the Book of Mormon and the ways in which it's financially motivated are the same ways that we see this being done for the Book of Commandments and for the Joseph Smith translation that never gets done in Jackson County, Missouri. This is the same mechanism. This is the same functionality of business, of printing, of selling books, selling, the new commandments of God to the populace, including the members of the church. So
Okay.
I'm just saying it's no different at all. Yeah. And actually, when you look at that wider understanding, it's not that Joseph has learned his lesson and he's going to do something different. He just thinks he just didn't quite get it right this first time with the Book of Mormon. He's now going to get it right with the Joseph Smith translation, this kind of effectively a commentary on the Bible, and he gets this idea along the way that they're going to print these revelations, and that's going to make the money. This is a business. It's a printing and mercantile business. It's reframed later, and the wording's changed to suggest that it's some kind of united order. The idea that everybody's putting in and getting out in these kind of logistic ways. But when you go and look at the events and the minutes of those meetings, these are income producing businesses that Joseph is endeavoring to support himself with.
Okay.
Anyway,
So
that's a lot.
yeah. Well, this is probably a good place, I would say, to end this part of the episode. But no, I think this is a lot of food for thought and something that I haven't explored very deeply. Quotes about them seeking financial reward for the Book of Mormon and the financial investment, and I think this is something that needs to be considered from people as well. David, I know you said you wanted to ask some questions at the end. Is there any questions you want to ask Ganesh on anything we've covered so far today, or anything else before we wrap up?
Well, I did want to ask a question about Emma Smith as being one of the witnesses, and maybe we can, get onto that on, on another occasion, if there is another occasion. I think Emma Smith is an interesting witness, and it would be good to talk about her in a bit more detail. But no, I don't have any other particular questions for this evening.
Yeah, and I think I'll save more of my questions on the witnesses for next time. I thought maybe we're gonna do this all in 4 parts. It's gonna be at least 5, and it's probably gonna be 6 or 7 at this rate. But
I guess the question is, are we having fun?
Yes.
Is this really interesting? Is it, we're geeking out and we're really drilling down to some really, deep specifics. But I think it's fascinating to consider these kinds of things that that are going on and how they play out a little bit later. Because I think, and this is one of my big things too, is that Joseph, to me, is incredibly consistent. He does pivot because he's it encounters a problem which God doesn't seem to warn him about, and then he has to make a big change. But he does. He operates in a very, very consistent manner, even though what happens changes the course of things over time, and he evolves as part of that. But yeah, I find that fascinating and amazing, and it's lovely exploring it with you both.
Yeah, no, it's been fun doing this again. I really enjoy our discussions. I think we're a good trio as well, having these discussions. And listeners, if you have enjoyed this episode, I would recommend go check out Ganesh's book as well, Joseph Smith, the Architect of Mormonism, and come back for part 5 because we're going to discuss more on the witnesses. You've got a lot more slides as well, and I'll see you next time on Mormonism with the Murph. Take care. Bye bye. Thanks everyone for watching this episode. If you've enjoyed it, please give it a like, share it with others who might benefit, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future content. You can also listen to these episodes on podcast form on Anchor or Spotify, and you can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Check out my website for more content, personal blog, and more. And if you care to donate to support me, you can via my PayPal or Patreon, or through the website. And you can also give donations via YouTube through Super Chats. Thanks for watching Mormonism with the Murph. Take care. Bye-bye.